Hey everybody, how are we doing? I'm Ben Griffith, and this is the Ben Griffith Breakdown. So, in today's episode, we are going to be talking about Donald Trump supporters and why they continue to follow him so vehemently, and also why Donald Trump is blowing out the GOP primary, regardless of everything that's been said and done over the last year. Now, as many of you know who have watched any of my videos, I am not necessarily the biggest fan of Donald Trump, but when I look at everything that's been happening over the last year, and I talk to Donald Trump supporters, and I get this very, uninhibited feedback from them, start to understand the mindset of them as voters and why they are not only drawn to Donald Trump at this point, but being pushed towards him. And I'll talk about that a little bit. So some of the things I want to talk about in today's episode. Number one, answer the question of how could you still vote for Donald Trump and why that's kind of a loaded question. Number two, how these attacks on Donald Trump are now not just propping him up, but propelling his candidacy at this point. And then also how this kind of radical agenda of Joe Biden is now dovetailing into that push towards Donald Trump. And also kind of where I think this is going to end up going at the end of the day. So let's get right into it. Answer the age-old question of that's seen on every single mainstream media outlet and by every single liberal on Twitter today. How in the world could you still vote for a man who is a liar, who has been indicted on 91 different felonies, who's an election denier, who's an insurrectionist, who's a rapist, who's a homophobe, who wants to be a dictator, who's a fascist? This man is Hitler. And the list goes on and on and on. And they come up with a new term for Donald Trump basically every day. What it seems like to me, what is happening here is the mainstream media and the left are just throwing labels and slurs at Donald Trump and dragging him to every single court to see what sticks, with the hope that sooner or later something will stick and they will be able to remove him from the presidential candidacy. The problem that they're having is that many, if not most of the things that are thrown at him are either outright lies, half-truths, and in many cases, things that are intentionally taken out of context for a quick soundbite and a quick news clip, right? So let's look at some of the things that are being said about Donald Trump, lately. Number one, he's been indicted on 91 different felonies. That is absolutely true. However, I believe that any objective person would look at this and clearly see that if Donald Trump never again ran for president, removed himself from politics, and just went back to being real estate Donald Trump, he would not be sitting in a single courtroom today. And I think that is very clear based on some of the court cases they've brought against him, right? And again, just trying to hope one of 91 of these felonies stick and they can try to remove him from the political landscape, right? Donald Trump is an insurrectionist. So talk about January 6th for a minute. I think everyone watching this video, for the most part, would agree that January 6th was a very bad day in this country. We would also agree it should have never happened. We'll also agree that there were a lot of stupid people doing a lot of stupid things that day, fighting with police, breaking things, stealing things, etc. Right? But January 6th was in no way, shape, or form an insurrection. It just simply was not. It was a protest. It was a protest of people who were very, very angry because they believed that an election was stolen from them and that their right to vote in this country had basically been stripped from them. And whether you agree with that or not, the premise of it is irrelevant at this point. But it was angry people at a protest, and that protest turned into a riot. But 99% of the people there that day had no intention of taking over the government or overturning an election. And it is, to call it an insurrection is hyperbole in its purest form. And Scott Adams had a great thing on Twitter the other day. He said, please explain the process by which trespassing in one building leads to control of the American nuclear triad. And that sums it up perfectly. There was not only no ability, but no intent to overthrow the government that day. To the point that Reuters and other news outlets have said the FBI has found scant evidence that the attack on January 6th at the Capitol was the result of an organized plot to overturn the presidential election results. There's just no evidence of it anywhere, but they keep saying it over and over and over again. And this, again, attempt to, if you say something enough times, it will inevitably become the truth, right? But this is another perfect example of something they say every day that is simply not true, to the point that it was used to try to remove Donald Trump from 2 state ballots in a presidential election, right? But January 6th is a twofold grievance for Trump supporters. As I said, there were a lot of stupid people doing a lot of stupid things that day. Again, fighting with police, breaking things, stealing things. But there were also a large number of people there who were completely innocent and are now sitting in jail. People who walked into the Capitol through doors, being held by Capitol Police, walked around and left. They didn't steal anything. They didn't fight with anyone. They didn't hurt anyone. And those people are sitting in jail. That is the United States government and our Department of Justice saying, if you oppose us and you step out of line, we will come and find you. We will round you up. We will conjure a crime out of thin air, and we will make an example of you. And that, as you could probably imagine, does not bode well for the perception of freedom and democracy in this country. So on top of being labeled insurrectionists, these people are also being victims of political persecution by our government. And again, insurrection easily debunked. There is no evidence at all that this group of people was trying to overthrow the government or the election. And if you look at these facts objectively, it is obvious. And this is just another thing that will inevitably be contradicted by history. So, what else? Oh, Donald Trump wants to be a dictator. So the other day in an interview about a few weeks ago, Donald Trump was asked, because people are saying he's going to be a dictator. So someone asked him, I believe it was someone from Fox News, are you going to be a dictator? And his response was, maybe on day one, I'll start drilling for oil. I'll close down the border, right? And it was a stupid thing to say. Which Donald Trump does from time to time. He says things that are not the best things to say. And I think this was supposed to be provocative. But if you look at it, it was a very tongue-in-cheek comment where he talked about executive orders and stuff like that, and clearly taken out of context, to the point that the next day, everybody in the mainstream media is saying, yep, there it is. We're all saying he wanted to be a dictator. Now he admitted it on national television, right? Clearly taken out of context, easily debunked. Same as Charlottesville, very fine people on both sides. This is something that if you look at it outside of the 3-second clip that they showed over and over and over again, when you look at the transcript, is easily debunked. But they said it for a year straight, and you don't really hear many people say it anymore because it's been debunked so many times, but it didn't stop them from using it for a year, calling them a racist because of it. The Russian collusion. Russian collusion was a complete and total fabrication of the truth. There wasn't a shred of evidence that was true in that whole thing. It was an excuse for the federal government to go after Trump and his acolytes with this investigation as a cover. 34 people were indicted. 34 people were indicted during that investigation, and during an investigation that was completely and totally made up. 34 people were indicted. And the mainstream media covered it and pushed it for 2 years straight. And the FBI propagated it and verified it over and over and over again. So between the FBI being directly involved in a made-up investigation and the jailing of January 6th people who did nothing wrong, didn't hurt anyone, who are sitting in jail, the FBI is now the enforcement arm of the Biden administration, right? And when you start to look at these things, these lies add up over and over and over again. They threw them off Twitter. They impeached him twice on BS charges. One of them being he was an insurrectionist, right? Again, they tried to impeach him on something that, again, is easily debunked. So when you look at these things and you look at them happening over and over and over that are clearly untrue, that are repeatedly debunked, you see this pattern of intellectual dishonesty with a very clear political agenda. So they continue to throw out these labels, these ridiculous court cases. Again, like if you look at this court case with Alan Bragg in New York, even MSNBC and CNN analysts were like, I don't think that's really going to fly. I don't really think they have a case here. They brought him into a court for insurance case, insurance fraud. And they said he defrauded a bank and an insurance company, even though they both came and testified that they weren't defrauded. They still found him liable. It's things like this that when you see these in the dishonesty that goes behind it, it's mind-bending. But the problem is that every single time they have one of these debunked slurs, they drag him into court for one of these ridiculous things. At this point, they look like the boy who cried wolf, right? And this coordinated attack from the mainstream media, liberal activist judges, attorney generals, etc., are now just at this point a broken record to the people in this country, especially Trump voters. And the problem that they're having now is that when Donald Trump does do something stupid or malicious, everyone just kind of rolls their eyes. Yeah, we get it. Donald Trump's a Nazi. Donald Trump's the devil. Orange man bad. And it's just not taken seriously anymore. So they have, at this point, lost control. Because of this, they've lost control of the narrative. And only the people who already hate Trump believe it. So they're not really moving the needle anymore, right? And the larger problem here, in my opinion, is that they've now started to transfer these labels to Trump supporters. And I should say started to, goes all the way back to deplorables. But now Donald Trump supporters are extremists. They're Nazis, they're fascists, they're racist, homophobes, xenophobes, insurrection supporters. They support a dictator. They're fascists, they're Nazis, blah, 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 blah. They should be in jail. And if you speak out against the Biden agenda's policies and this political dogma that they have in place, that they're forcing down the throat of the American people, you're vilified as, again, an anti-immigrant, racist, heartless, transphobic, ignorant traitor, whatever. So in the eyes of Donald Trump voters, every lever of government that can be pulled by Democrats is being pulled to either slander or remove Donald Trump from the political landscape altogether. So it's infuriating to them. And it's infuriating to the point that people are going to vote for Trump out of spite at this point. Just to say, you will not silence me. And this is not a third world country where you can use the levers of government to remove a leading political candidate. And I've had people come to me and say, you know what? I kind of think that Ron DeSantis is my guy, but I'm voting for Donald Trump in the primary, to make a point at this point, right? That you're not going to tell me who I can and cannot vote for. This is my country. This is my democracy. And it is now, for these people, become personal. And that is not a good thing for Joe Biden. Because when people show up to vote, they show up to vote for issues. And when you stack on, I'm voting for all these issues and against your agenda, but now you've also made it personal, that is something that leads to a ridiculously high voter turnout, exponentially higher than you thought it would be. And that could be disastrous for Joe Biden in the fall. So every single time they drag Donald Trump to court, they throw a new lie on him, they try to take him off the ballot, his fundraising and his polls go through the roof every single time. So Democrats look at this and they say, how in the world could you vote for a man in spite of the fact that he's been indicted on 91 different felonies? And what they just can't wrap their head around is people are not voting for Donald Trump in spite of the fact that he's been indicted on 91 different felonies. They're voting for him because he was indicted on 91 different felonies, and they think all of those felonies are complete and total BS. And why wouldn't they, after everything that they've seen here? So, furthermore, every single time they attempt to indict Donald Trump or take him off the ballot, he looks like a victim. And when you look like a victim, you in turn look like a fighter. And when you look like a fighter, you in turn look like someone who is strong and resilient, which at this point stands in direct contrast, is the antithesis of Joe Biden. So Donald Trump supporters believe that their candidate is being vilified and persecuted. They believe that they are being vilified and persecuted. They believe that our democracy is broken and that broken democracy is working against them. And addition to that, Joe Biden, his agenda has become so radical that people have had enough. They've had enough, and they don't care about personality anymore. They just want results. And I'm going to say that again because I think that that's probably the most salient point of this entire episode. People don't care about personality anymore. They just want results, right? And when I try to explain that to people, I explain it through this analogy of a brain surgeon. If you had some life-threatening brain tumor and, complicated surgery, and you had two surgeons come in and talk to you. One was very polite, great bedside manner, explained everything to you in detail, answered all of your questions, answered all of your wife's questions, assured you that everything was going to be okay, left the room. The next guy comes in. Hey, what's up there, tough guy? I heard you got a lump there in your skull. Don't worry, man. I'm going to get you opened up, scoop that thing out, and you're going to be just fine. Hey, man, you got a really good looking wife here. Good for you, bud. Turns around and leaves the room. And you'd be like, what? But you find out afterwards that the first guy's a pretty good surgeon. The second guy is one of the best, if not the best brain surgeons in the entire country. At that point, you are not going to care about the man's bedside manner or his personality. All you are going to care about is the end result. And that is the man you're going to want to have operate on you. And that's where we are as a country. So you have an administration that is going after parents from PTA meetings, pushing DEI in the military. The FAA said the other day that they're going to start hiring people with severe intellectual and psychiatric disabilities. The FAA, who controls the air safety, wants to hire more people with severe intellectual and psychiatric disabilities. They're weaponizing the FBI, like I just talked about. We are weak on the world stage through whether it was Afghanistan or everything that's happening in Yemen. If you look at a video I just put out talking about Yemen, talking about how they are just firing missiles at us indiscriminately with complete impunity. And all we do are these very tit-for-tat responses that don't deter anyone from doing anything. We have immigrants coming over the border in waves. We have a crisis at our border. And I could go on and on and on about all the ridiculous things that this administration is doing. But the point here is that people feel like they're being pushed and they're being pushed and they're being pushed. And they finally feel like their heels are on the edge of a cliff. And these people are now starting to push back. And one of the ways that they're pushing back is by voting for Donald Trump. And again, people are willing to forgo personality and personal flaws to get back to a place that they consider to be political stability and political sanity. And at this point, this tactic is backfiring with Democrats, but they will stay the course because they have no choice. They are stuck between a rock and a hard place. If they back off of this, they'll look weak and hypocritical. But if they continue, they will, in my opinion, push this election into Donald Trump's hands. So I believe that they will, again, stay this course and keep going with this Hail Mary approach. And it will continue to perpetuate this perception of Donald Trump as a fighter, as a victim. And I guess in closing, what Democrats and liberals don't understand here is that these actions are only adding to his political coffers and his polls. You can only attempt to disenfranchise and vilify a group of people while simultaneously jamming an extreme agenda down their throat before those people rise up. And that's what you're seeing here. My prediction is obviously Donald Trump is going to win the primary. I think that's a foregone conclusion. But I also think that Donald Trump is, because of this, going to win the presidential election in November. And I think he's going to win it by a higher margin than people. I don't think it's going to be a blowout, but I think he will win it by a higher margin than people think. And I think that this banana republic attempt to remove Trump will, in the end, ultimately fail. So, guys, I'll leave it there. But anyone watching this who's a conservative or Trump fan, you're probably sitting there nodding along going, yeah. Everything you're saying is true, right? But the reason for this video is for people who are more independent, liberal-minded people who just cannot seem to understand the mindset and where Trump voters are coming from, right? And if you're a liberal and you're sitting there and saying, well, I've watched this video and I still believe that Donald Trump is an insurrectionist and he's a dictator and he's a fascist and all these things, know that what I'm explaining to you is the perception of Donald Trump voters. And perception is reality. And Democrats and liberals have done little to try to understand that perception. They've done even less to try to change that perception, and have done everything to perpetuate it. And that is, in essence, the problem here. So, again, I will leave it there. But hopefully, guys, this was helpful. Again, leave questions, comments in the comment section. I'll get to what I can. And we will talk soon. Thanks again, guys. Talk soon.